Cool, so we're on the next video. What we're going to do is look at how to look at the bump spring status, or the shock spring engagement basically. So if I'm going in the garage here, we talked about these shock springs and when they're engaging. Basically if we want to engage it sooner so it's not hitting the track as much, we're using them to control the ride heights. You can kind of see when they're engaging or how much. What you can see is actually, like, if for example the right front shock spring, if it disengages out of like turn 2 or out of turn 4 and the left front stays engaged, you're going to see the right front coming up. It's going to do some kind of weird stuff. Same thing with the left front disengaging. You can see handling characteristics in the car based on what this part of the car is doing. What is the front end doing? You could get a pretty good idea just from the ride heights. I mean, I could tell you right now that coming out of turn number 2, right here you can see that the ride heights kind of come up just a little bit from where they were down into 1. This is probably where I'm getting on the throttle, and you can see it gets gradual as I get more in the throttle, especially out of 2. And this was on my fast lap, I believe. And then down the straightaway they're high, and that's just because basically when you give throttle, basically weight is transferring to the back of the car, the front end comes up. It's always going to be like that. We want to minimize this as much as possible though. As this front end comes up, it is coming off the shock springs, and if you were to see that the left side's coming off the shock spring more and the right side looks like it's lower in the corner, then you know why. I mean, at least you kind of know why. Pinning the left side can be kind of hard sometimes. It is what it is. But anyway, getting into how we go about that, right? So you have the bump spring status here. This is going to use the wrong math by default because it has no idea. It's using whatever you put in at last. And how you find that is go to Tools, Mass, and then click on Weight Forces. And then we do left front bump spring engage and right front bump spring engage. The reason we have to change this is because how soon the shock spring engages is based on where the packer is at. And because it's a 4-inch spring, they know that it's going to engage at some point or not. You could put it at the packer at 0 and it'll never engage, but the level that it engages in is determined by basically a math equation involving the shock deflection and the packer height. Just broken down the easiest simple form. So the packer 1375 and the shock deflection 420. So what we're going to do is go over here and go, we're going to go to the eSport Racing Group page, right? esportracinggroup.com. Just click on the logo. It's going to take you to eSport Racing Group home. They just changed the site again, so you're going to have to kind of find it. But what I found is right here, the shock engagement is a little calculator. What we're going to do is use both sides right now. We're going to click next, and we're going to enter the packer on the right front, or the left front, I'm sorry, which is 1.375. With this, you have to, when you enter the packer, you actually have to click the drop down, because if you literally just do the type it in and then hit next, it won't take anything. So we'll look at the left front shock deflection is at 4.20. This one is fine to just type in. We'll hit next. Now we're going to look at the right front. So 1.813. And then we'll look at 2.66. Cool, so now I have these numbers. So what we're going to do is copy this one, pull up Motec, and we're going to replace this 6511 with the 5080. So what you need to do, make sure you do not erase the minus sign here, and if you do, you can just put it back in, and then there's a comma after this 80. The comma needs to stay there as well. It's really easy to replace the comma if it gets highlighted or whatever. So now what we'll do is delete this 3.943, and then we're going to go ahead and go to 3190. Sometimes this doesn't change. If you don't change the shock spring and the other stuff doesn't change, you're fine. So now that I've got that done, you can see it completely changed. It went from being nowhere near engaged to it's actually riding on the shock spring most of the way around. You can see that the left front does disengage slightly coming out of turn number 2, and then it comes back up. And then out of 4, same thing. Now on the right side, you can see the lowest point is 0.3. It never disengages. It is riding on the shock spring the whole time. There's nothing wrong with that. The higher you go on the packer, the more it's going to engage the shock spring. If the car isn't engaging the shock spring, like it comes off the shock spring, the car is coming up. So what this means, like when you see out of turn 2 here, the left front is coming up, which is fine. As you can see on the right side how it is also declining, just not as much, maybe not as rapidly. It's coming up as well. They're coming up maybe close to even. The way you could kind of fix this, if you wanted it to ride on the shock springs a little more, maybe be a little more consistent, would be to run a higher packer, but then you have to compensate by running maybe a lower shock spring to allow the car to travel more. So it's kind of you play with it and you get it where you want it. Really, this isn't going to hurt us too much, and there isn't a lot of crazy detail that you're going to find from this. There are just weird things you might find, like personally with the VRS setup at Chicagoland, I was able to determine that the left front shock spring was disengaging out of turn 2 and turn 4, and it was just kind of, it looked like it was orchestrated, like they did it on purpose. The way they had put the left front spring and the RMA sim and the packer, they kind of worked it all together to maybe achieve that for a specific reason. And I talked to some people, and there can be specific reasons that you do stuff like that, basically allowing a ton of travel and then slamming the left front shock spring. You're doing kind of weird stuff to just try to tie the left front down as much as possible and get as much ride height control as you can. And I think what we're doing here is pretty good because it's given us pretty good consistent ride height. So on this bump spring status page, you do have the left splitter and right splitter channel, and then you can see the ride height front left and front right. Something I forgot to mention before is you do have the center front splitter ride height. So this is the overall ride height from the front splitter in the center, and this is using a sensor. So this one is accurate. So you can absolutely trust this if you don't trust these, but we more often than not just use these two and then kind of reference this occasionally. So that about covers that. I hope you enjoyed and I hope it's useful.